PEs make money by selling companies. Very important to understand. As soon as they've made an investment, they're thinking about how to sell that investment, who to sell it to, how to position it. Obviously, they want to sell it for more than they bought it for, and the components of that can be just growing the business, but also the much sought after increase in the number of turns. What does that mean? If they bought a company for a multiple of 5 times EBITDA, let's say, then if they can grow it, clean it up, make it more attractive such that the seller a few years down the road is willing to pay 6 or 7 times EBITDA, then so much the better. So ideally they grow the EBITDA, increase the number of turns, sell it in that way to make a return. But from day one, they're thinking about the sale process, the universe of potential buyers, and the things they need to do to that business, other than grow it, of course, to make it more valuable, and maybe changing the business mix, the product mix, professionalizing the company, setting up different structures. There's many, many ways to make a company more valuable other than just the bottom line and the cash flow. So first things first, think about the sale. So, of course, PE funds have to buy companies, and these could be privately owned, could belong to other PE funds, could be family owned, could be a take-private deal where they're looking to take a company off the stock market, bring it back into private hands, could be a corporate carve-out, fairly popular, where there's a neglected business, a so-called orphan business within a much larger parent, often a public company, and that's sold to the PE and then becomes a standalone company. They could engage a buy-side investment bank to help them find deals. They are often contacted by sell-side investment banks with engagements to sell companies, to spin off again, do those types of carve-outs, etc. The ultimate, the much sought-after scenario is a so-called proprietary deal, where it's not an auction, it's not a competitive process, but it's a deal that has been found by one of the partners, perhaps, or through a contact or an intermediary, whereas more of a sort of a controlled and private process between the seller and the PE fund. But all those variations, and probably a few more that I haven't mentioned, are the case when a PE fund makes an investment and buys a company. Structure of a fund will consist of general partners and limited partners. The general partners are the guys you see on the website who run the fund, run the organization, find the investments, make the investments, deal with the companies, right? The portfolio companies, run the whole thing. The limited partners are the guys that provide most of the money. These are typically institutions, could be insurance companies, banks, pension funds, could be some high net worth individuals, accredited investors that supply 97, 98, 99% of the money in a private equity fund, the balance being provided by the general partners themselves. And typically, and there's a little bit of variation around this, but typically the structure involves the general partners earning a so-called management fee of around 2% of committed capital each year of the fund. And then in addition, they will earn 20% of the profits earned by the fund over the lifetime of the fund, and that's the so-called carried interest. Typical lifetime of a fund, let's say, is around 10 years. So the whole process can involve, let's say, 1 to 2 years of fundraising, and then over the 10-year life of that fund, you've got 5 years of capital deployment, up to 5 years of capital deployment in terms of making investments, and then another 5 years in terms of reaping those returns, selling out of those investments. So it's a fairly long-term commitment. In the comments below, I'm going to lay out a kind of a typical math system for how the fund works in terms of where the money comes from, where it goes, and how that carried interest is accounted for, rather than me trying to explain it and wave my hands around. It's fairly simple when you see it laid out. Roles for an executive with PE funds. If you're not an employee or a member of the fund itself, general partner or one of the associates, etc., you could be a portfolio company CEO. You could have a role as a deal advisor. A lot of companies have operating partners that have various names for them, where you will help out with due diligence with the deals, and then you could be a board member of one of the portfolio companies advising on operational issues. You should come to the table with some industry expertise as well as some functional expertise. So let's say you're a chemicals guy with an operations background. That's a value set you're bringing to the table there as one of those operating partners, operating team members. You could be, if you're an accredited investor, potentially be a limited partner also in one of those funds. I often advise people it's best to approach PE funds with an idea, not just you have to have your skill set, right? You have to have your experience and skill set, but come along with an idea relating to an industry, a sector, a particular company, perhaps. I have this sense that this company may be ready to sell because of generational wealth transfer or maybe non-core status within a larger corporate parent. Something like that. Just showing up and saying, hey, I got all these skills and experience and, pay me to help you find investments. No, it's not going to work. So I wouldn't really bother with that. But a lot of activity as we'll see in the surfactant sector in particular by private equity. So certainly worth being aware of that. The role of private equity in specialty chemicals and surfactants in particular has been pretty good, I would say, in the past few years. So fairly recently, we saw the formation of Verdant Chemical by OpenGate Capital, executing a carve-out of the amphoterics business out of Solvay, as they called themselves at the time, now Science Co. And that, as some of you may remember, was the old McIntyre business originally. And so the PE firm carved it out, standalone company, held onto it for a few years, recently sold it to a Korean buyer, Samyang. Similarly, One Rock Capital bought the Kankakee plant that belonged to BASF. It has a long storied history, which I won't go into. Set that up as a standalone business called Kensing Solutions, fairly traditional corporate carve-out, easy for me to say, of a surfactant business. One that I was involved in a while ago was the carve-out of the silicones business out of Clariant. They called it Clariant Life Sciences. Genex 360, the PE fund carved that out, and we set it up as a standalone company called Cyvance, and a couple of years into the mission sold that to Milliken. And of course, in the chemical distribution sector, private equity has been fairly active. Today, one of the largest distributors in the world, Univar, is owned by Apollo, a large PE fund. And there's a lot of other interest and activity in the distribution sector. So I hope you have found these 5 interesting things also useful. And as always, like, comment, and subscribe. And I think next week we're going to talk about venture capital, which is a somewhat different subsector of private equity. Thanks again for listening.